Now Publix is open 20%. It's a problem. Okay? Anyway, what they found was this mouse has a mutation to the gene that makes leptin. So the mouse doesn't make any leptin. So consequently, there's no negative feedback circuit in its brain telling the mouse that it shouldn't eat. It's hungry all the time. So the scientific verbiage for that is called hyperphagia. Hyperphagia is hungry all the time. Too hungry. And so the mouse is obese because it eats all the time, obviously. And the reason is because it has a mutation to the gene that makes a hormone called leptin for long-term food intake regulation. When they discovered this, the way this story really goes is people were super excited because they thought they had figured it out, right? They thought they had solved the obesity problem in our society. So like, oh shit, got it. People that are obese have a leptin receptor. They either have a receptor mutation or they have a hormone mutation. Done. And that's easy because I can make a bunch of hormone in the lab. We can do that for years with insulin, right? And others. So let's make a bunch of it in the lab and you can just take an injection and fix it. But is that the answer? Of course not. Because if it was the answer, you'd know this story, right? So they took blood from a bunch of obese people and compared them to healthy controls, and guess what? Leptin levels in obese people are improved. As you would expect. You were hoping to find a mutation in zero leptin, but that's not. They found the normal answer. Leptin levels are high. So what's the problem? Feedback circuits. Or other. Again, it's very similar to the type 2 diabetes story. When you're a type 2 diabetic early on, are your insulin levels low or high? They're super, super high. They're through the roof. The problem isn't that your pancreas isn't making insulin. The problem is your skeletal muscle system doesn't care anymore. It's like, oh my God, settle down, right? Too much is bad. Too much is bad. It's the same thing with injecting the steroids, the case study. Too much, and the circuit just says enough and it shuts off. And that's the solution. Fascinating thing, right? The reason it's so interesting, it opened up an entire new field of science, just based on a mouse in a cage. No one knew this 15, 20 years ago. This was brand new. And that's not a long time in science. 20 years is not, in the science field, not a long time. Okay, I'm done with that. Here's the cartoon. The cartoon that shows the location of the various glands. Excuse me. I said what I want to say about this. Okay, so what are hormones? You can expect to see a multiple choice question about this. I guess I should say, you should definitely know the location of all of these. I wouldn't ask you a short answer question if you know the short answer questions already. But if a question said something about where is the thymus gland or something, you should know that it's, as I just said, it sits on top of the heart. You should know the location of the major glands, for sure. In terms of a multiple choice question, that's not a big deal. All right. What are hormones? Again, I would expect to see a multiple choice question about what hormones are. So what are they? Chemical messengers. Small molecules produced by glands, secreted into the circulatory system, into the bloodstream, that regulate metabolism. They tell cells what to do. On a very broad level, right? Does the hormone act on every single cell in your body? Does any given hormone necessarily work on every single cell in your body? No. For a hormone to act on a particular cell type, then, what does that cell type have to have? The receptor, right? So the idea here is hormones bind to a receptor. So yeah, certain hormones could act on every single cell in your body if every single cell has that hormone receptor. A good example of that is thyroxine. So the thyroid gland produces a hormone called thyroxine, and another one called triiodothyronine or something, and it binds basically every single cell in your body. But again, most of them are much more selective than that. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Again, I would expect you to know these things. What are the 3 classes of hormones? So I'm not going to ask you to, name every single hormone. You're going to pick 5, but you should know, again, for multiple choice, the broad generalities, right? So hormones come in 3 different flavors. Amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of what? Proteins, yeah. And proteins are typically water-soluble or not water-soluble. It's a 50-50 shot. What do you think? Are most proteins soluble in water? Yes, they are. They have to be. There's very few insoluble proteins. The reason I make the point here is it has to do with the way that they work. Okay? Water solubility drives the mechanism of action. That's where this is going. So the amino acid-based hormones, which again we just said amino acids are proteins, are water soluble. That means they circulate freely in my bloodstream. But can they get into my cells easily? What's my plasma membrane made out of? Lipids. Are lipids water soluble? No. That's the whole point of the phospholipid bilayer, right? To keep stuff out and start stuff in. So here we go, right? Just for fun. I've got my phospholipid bilayer, right? And I've got this protein-based water-soluble hormone. It gets to the cell easily, right? But it can't get in. So where does the receptor have to be for the water-soluble hormone? Yeah, that's right. It's right here. Oops, I wanted that to be enough. And then, just for fun, you'll see a cartoon in a minute. It activates another protein that's attached to it, and that activates the second messenger system. That's how these ones work. And then it'll lead to what we would call pleiotropic effects. Many different effects inside. Here's an example to try to put it in perspective for you, just for fun. Insulin is like this. Insulin is a water-soluble, protein-based hormone. We've been making insulin forever in the lab, and before that they used to isolate it from pigs. Not a problem. It works just like this. It binds to a receptor called the receptor is called AKT. And so it activates what's called the AKT signaling pathway. Insulin, again, does lots of different things, but all of them are related to glucose metabolism. For example, if I just got done eating a bunch of candy bars, and then I washed all down with Mountain Dew, that sounds good. Butterfingers and Mountain Dew, I like. No. Not often, but let's just pretend. It's after Halloween, you're off your diet, I fell off it. Easter this year, I saw the Easter candies be on G1 at Publix, and I'm like, that's a good deal. I don't eat all those. Oh yeah, I am all. No, in fact, more and more. Alright, so you just gotta wolf down a bunch of sugar. Sugar is a carbohydrate, right? Glucose. And glucose I'm gonna use to make what? What do I need glucose for? To make what? Energy, right? In the form of what's the energy molecule? ATP. So when I eat glucose, one of the things insulin does is it shifts all my metabolic pathways to what? Burn glucose to make ATP. Why? Because I got a bunch of glucose available, right? You following this, yeah? At the same time, I can also be burning fat for energy, right? But if I've got a bunch of glucose, should I be burning fat for energy at the same time? No. Fat is my storage form of energy, right? So insulin also downregulates all my lipid burning pathways. All of them. Right? So my preferred fuel source is glucose. Right? I can't store glucose very effectively, so I'd rather just burn it right now. Right? So I eat a bunch of glucose, insulin is secreted, and it activates all the glucose burning pathways, all the enzymes and stuff are produced necessary to burn glucose. At the same time, I'm like, well, I might as well shut down my fat burning furnaces, so insulin downregulates all those. Insulin also upregulates fat storage pathways. So once you know this, right? If I eat too many glucose molecules, I eat too many candy bars, I'm not going to excrete the glucose. I'm going to store it, right? And so insulin activates all the glycogenesis pathways, like this. You see what I'm saying? How it works? The reason, again, the way the system works is such that I can turn on this pathway, turn off that pathway, turn on another pathway, like this, all for this particular utility of use the glucose I have now, right? When glucose levels drop, the hormone is called glucagon, and it does all the opposite stuff. It activates fat burning. It activates the release of stored glucose if you've got it in the form of glycogen, and so on. If you're trying to lose weight, carbs lower better. As I just told you, if you're consuming glucose, you can't lose weight. And I just told you why. When glucose is high, so is insulin, and insulin turns off, lipolytic pathways. You cannot burn fat and eat glucose at the same time. It's not possible. You like that story, right? Now, the other two, steroids and eicosanoids. Cholesterol is a lipid, right? And you might not know, but arachidonic acid is also a lipid. Okay? So the other two, steroid and eicosanoid-based hormones, are lipid-soluble, yes? Now, back to the same question. Are lipid-soluble hormones water-soluble? No. So how are they ever going to get to the cell? How do they get here? They do have a receptor on the inside. But how do they get there? So it's testosterone, estrogen, progesterone are lipid-soluble hormones. They are derivatives of steroids. So all derivatives of cholesterol. So I would love it, right? Trying to go to the gym, all that kind of stuff. And I would love all this testosterone. It gets my muscles, so I can build muscle mass. Or if you're a female and estrogen, right, is at play. And for men too, I want to increase my bone density. Great. That's what estrogen is. One of the things it does. Master regulator of increasing bone density. Great. How am I going to get estrogen produced in my ovaries or testosterone produced in my testes? Somewhere down here. Right? How's it going to get to its target location? If it's not water soluble, can it just swim through like protein, like the amino acid? No. So how's it going to get there? It has to be carried there. So lipid-soluble hormones are transported by proteins. You have a protein called steroid-binding globulin. SD. This is just for fun. This is telling a story. The basics you should know. They have to be transported by a protein. You don't need to know the name of the protein. Steroid-binding globulin. Just for fun. So testosterone, a little bit of it is free, and same for estrogen and progesterone, but most of it is bound to a transport protein. It gets transported here, okay? Now, it gets dropped off at the door. Great. And back to green. So here's my, estrogen or whatever. Now, it doesn't have any problem getting in. So this is like sweet. It just gets dropped off at the door, and boom, and it binds. Like this. Now, again, the mechanism of action is different now. These ones go straight into the nucleus. The receptor hormone complex, now active, enters the nucleus, and this is the mark. So this is my gene, okay? And this complex binds to the promoter. We're getting a little bit beyond what you need to know. The point here is steroid-based hormones directly, this is what you want to know, they directly activate gene expression. They directly what? Activate gene expression. So again, protein ones bind to a membrane receptor that drives, it can drive gene expression changes, yeah, but it activates multiple different pathways, like insulin, what we just said. Here, it's more specific. When testosterone enters my muscle cells, it drives protein synthesis. When estrogen enters my bone cells, it drives the increase of osteoblastic activity in making new bone. Remember osteoblasts, right? Much more focused in its job by directly activating gene expression. Same thing for the eicosanoids. Now we're going to see slides from that in a second. I just felt like telling the story. These are the mechanisms of action. So we said, what can hormones do? This is the list of the 5 things. Alter the membrane permeability. Insulin will be like this, right? I didn't specifically say, but insulin binds to the surface of the cells and tells the cells to suck up the glucose. Interestingly, the only insulin-sensitive tissue you have is skeletal muscle system, and a little bit on the liver, and a little bit on the fat. But the major insulin-responsive tissue is skeletal. That's why I was studying it at the burn. That was the reason. We wanted to fix the skeletal muscle system. One of the things means it doesn't want to do anymore is take up glucose. Make proteins, yeah, turn on or turn off enzymes. I mentioned to you, insulin does this, right? Activating this pathway and deactivating that. Induce secretory activity. So we said already, my pituitary gland makes a bunch of hormones that tell other glands to make and secrete hormones, yes? And then stimulate mitosis, and you know mitosis is cell division. Good? All right. Here we go. I made all this points already, okay? Protein, water-soluble ones bind to membrane-bound receptors. There's always exceptions, so it turns out that thyroid hormone is actually not water-soluble, and it's transported and it behaves like a lipid-based one. And there you see at the bottom about the steroids, and we said all this already. Yeah. And I don't need you to know this, so this is the story I was kind of mentioning to you. I erased it about how the second messenger system works for the water-soluble weight-based ones. It's called cyclic AMP, and you don't need to know that. And if you're curious, though, you could read about this, but I don't need you to know it for the test. Okay. This is signal, yeah, just cross it off. This is signal transduction stuff I don't need you to know. All right. And again, it's not, you might read it over. I need you to know the basics, right? What I told you with my words. What you see on the slides is the basics plus a little bit more. Are you clear on what I need you to know? So, right, here's the story about how the steroid ones work, and I walked you through it. They enter the cell, they bind to the receptor, back goes to the nucleus, activates gene expression. I need you to know the basics. And there's the cartoon for the basics, as I drew. Or so. Okay. We also already addressed this issue about target cell specificity. So the hormones are all present in my bloodstream all the time, right? But they're not all acting on every single cell type. I have to have the receptor. That's what this is talking about. If there's no receptor, it doesn't work. Activating the target cell, of course, then becomes dependent on multiple factors. What is the concentration of the hormone? How much hormone? Also, I can alter the number of the receptors. And depending on the shape of the receptor, the affinity of binding. Okay, so this is again a small detail. How attracted the hormone is to the receptor can change. I can change the structure of the receptor, meaning that the hormone might bind better to this receptor than it will to that receptor, which means that a given hormone concentration can affect one cell preferentially over another cell. It's also just worth a mention for fun. Most hormones can regulate their own receptors expression. Following that, insulin stimulates the production of more insulin receptors. Like that. As long as it's within the range. The problem becomes when there's too much. Oh yeah, there it is. Right. So, hormones can alter their own receptors expression. The general mechanism is for a hormone to increase its own receptors expression on the target cell. But some, like you can see there, do downregulate that. And I mentioned already about the extreme conditions. So with type 2 diabetics, insulin goes way up. And eventually the skeletal muscle is like, oh my God, it's too much. Overload, right? System overload. And so what happens is that downregulates them. The receptor on the muscle cells go away. So what does the pancreas do? Make more insulin, right? And then what does the pancreas finally do after that? Yeah, it continues to make more and more and more until it just fries out. And then type 2 diabetics are like type 1 diabetics. And they're insulin dependent. But at first, type 2 diabetics are not insulin dependent. Okay. This slide is also, we want to know these basic things about hormones. Factors affecting duration of action. This is obvious, right? How fast do I make it versus how fast is it removed? Okay. I'm not seeing anything overwhelming here. that globally gets called the half-life, right? So my glands are constantly making it, at the same time my liver is pretty much the liver is constantly removing it. You can see there the concentrations vary from short to long. Right. The water soluble will have the shorter half-lives because there's always, did you know your bloodstream is full of enzymes that are just chopping up proteins all? Okay, your bloodstream is full of enzymes that are just digesting proteins. Found there, so the reason that these water soluble ones go away fast is because they're being eaten by enzymes in your bloodstream anyway. That's good, right? Because I don't want insulin acting for a long period of time. Insulin is one of those turn it on, turn it off really fast as I consume carbohydrates. Okay, I mentioned this to you already about the circulation, either bound or free. This also affects production and secretion. Power hair move, enzymes, liver, kidneys. This is standard metabolic ways. Okay. I want to know, again, I can see multiple choice questions about these three words. These are just basic vocabulary words. They're not specific to any particular topic. And these are easy words. You probably have heard of at least the second two. And the first one isn't anything overwhelming either. So permissive, the name sounds just like what it means. It means one cell kind of needs the hormone, another hormone's permission to do its thing. So in order for hormone number 2 to work at all, hormone number 1 already has to be there. That's what permissive means. The number 2 there says synergy. Synergy is, again, just a basic vocabulary word. It means some of the parts is greater than the individual parts. Forgive my small window of view of things, but testosterone and growth hormone, for example, synergize to increase muscle. Same thing. So growth hormone is one of those master synergy ones. So growth hormone, along with thyroxine, will stimulate further, faster metabolism and cell growth. That would also increase bone density, increases faster in synergy with estrogen and so on. And then antagonism is when one, works against the other one, and insulin and glucagon are examples of antagonistic hormones. Okay. Control of release. Most of them are regulated by negative feedback. You remember negative feedback, right, from AP1 and Bio 1? If you took my class, you should remember. We need this one for that. So tell me about negative feedback. When something goes up, the effect is to do what? Make it go back, down, right? To normal, right? So when estrogen levels go up, it feeds back onto the brain to tell it to stop making the hormone that tells the ovaries to make estrogen, for example. All right, you get the idea. Right? This, again, gives me that set point, that range. So we can modify with the nervous system, as you know. Humoral stimuli is one way, neural and hormonal, or you look at cartoons. So I mentioned already, the first one there, glucose stimulates insulin secretion, for example. Sodium also is important for regulating aldosterone. You know aldosterone there? We're going to get to that. Aldosterone regulates sodium concentration in the bloodstream. Release the consumption or whatever of certain ions or metabolites will regulate hormone production. Neural number 2 there, so nerves can directly stimulate a gland to produce and secrete a hormone. Adrenal hormones are like this. When I'm stressed out, right, fight or flight response, my nervous system is telling my adrenal glands to make epinephrine. And then hormonal hormones telling other glands to make hormones. And the case study is an example of that. And we're going to look at it in a minute. I'm going to draw this out for you, the example for that one. All right, and here's the cartoon for all three. Yeah, calcium concentration is the one they're using for iron concentration. We'll talk about parathyroid glands shortly. Yeah, here's the adrenal gland thing. And again, you're definitely wanting to look at pituitary. So what I'm seeing here is the pituitary gland producing various hormones telling, various target glands to make their respective hormones. And we'll walk through all that in a minute. Okay. So these are the major glands, as we said: pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal. We'll walk through them now. Yeah. I want to maybe, is this a multiple choice question? Maybe. Just make sure you know the infundibulum is the stalk that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary. Infundibulum. Please. Alright. So the pituitary has two lobes, posterior and anterior. The did we look at the cartoon here? No. Alright, let's look at the cartoon and then I'll go back. So the way this works is, the neurons in the hypothalamus, the axons extend down the infundibulum, and the axon terminals stop here in the back part of the posterior part of the gland, yes? And again, you can see that there's a lot of blood vessels here. So in this case, the posterior lobe of the pituitary, the glands are produced, the hormones are produced by the neurons located up here, yeah? Like it says. The neurons here make oxytocin and ADH. They're transmitted or transferred down the axons and released here and taken up into the bloodstream. Yes? The posterior lobe doesn't actually make any hormones. The hormones are made up in the hypothalamus. What's oxytocin for? Contractions. What else? It does. It synergizes with prolactin for milk production and makes you happy. It's a pair bonding hormone released post-coitus. Can you? I don't know, maybe. It's an increasing of your metabolism, so probably. Yeah. So it's a pair bonding hormone, right? Makes you like your baby and like your mate. Did I ruin it for you? You thought you loved this for fun. No, it's a science for that. I usually say be careful who you, can I say this? We're all, be careful who you ask. Because when you have sex, you make this oxytocin, and you're like, oh, I have warm and fuzzy feelings about it. Be careful. Right. Okay. The anterior lobe, so now we're, looking at the front part here. Yeah. Front part here. You notice again that it's highly vascular, and it makes up. I wanted to look at the list. Here's the acronyms for these hormones. It's a mess. I'm going to need you to learn some of them. We're going to see the list of hormones in a minute. So that's the short list of 6 different hormones right there. GH is growth hormone. PRL is prolactin. I think there's slides for this one. Okay, so here's the negative feedback loop. The whole thing. Let me walk you through this feedback loop now. It's called hypothalamic pituitary target organ feedback loop. Hypothalamic target organ, hypothalamic pituitary target organ. The one I'm interested in is the hypothalamic pituitary testes or ovary axis. If you don't like my explanation, you can Google this. I think this is on your list of short answers. I need you to write about this week for the test. Okay, so for all this week. And it's what the case study is about. Here's how it works. Hypothalamus. Pituitary. And then down here it's either I'll tell you both stories. It's either testes or ovaries. hypothalamus makes a hormone. That's how the story starts. The hormone is called GnRH. Gn is short for gonadotropin. R is for releasing, H is for hormone. So the hypothalamus makes a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone. It doesn't do much, or it doesn't have to do very far. So again, the neurons are up here. It goes down here and tells the cells of the pituitary gland here to make two hormones. All right? The two hormones that the pituitary makes relative to our conversation are FSH and LH. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. The two hormones, you'll love it. I love a full circle. We're going to come back to this at the end when we do reproduction. This is how the female reproductive system is. The hormones are named for their function in the female reproductive system. So here's that story quickly. FSH, per ovarian cycle, FSH drives the maturation to full term of one of the follicles. So inside of the ovary, there's eggs. But there's not just eggs by themselves. Eggs are surrounded by cells, and so the structure is called a follicle. The way it works is FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, stimulates the follicles to mature. One of them per cycle, typically only one, matures to the most mature state called a grafting follicle, and that's the one that ovulates and so on. After ovulation, luteinizing hormone tells the ovaries to make lots of progesterone and estrogen as I wait for fertilization to occur and consequently implantation. So it's prepping the female body to carry a baby. That's how it works. And you know the effects, right? And I'll save the rest of that story for the boy. For the boy. FSH binds the testes and drives sperm production. Oops. It's called spermatogenesis. So similar functions, right? We said for the female, FSH drives egg maturation. Now for the boy, FSH drives sperm production. Can you see it? Spermatogenesis. Yes. LH tells the testes. LH tells the testes to make testosterone. What is that spelling? That was wrong. Maybe it's right. Testosterone is right? Okay, it's too small and it's dark in here. You get the idea. Testosterone. Okay. So testosterone, yeah.
Can you spell the LH?
Luteinizing hormone? Yeah. L-U-T-E-I, lutein, yeah. Yeah. The good news about science, thank goodness for me, most science words are spelled phonetically. So to spell it how it sounds, you're probably going to be right. Luteinizing. No. English is complicated, right? Alright. Okay. So testosterone, just like estrogen and progesterone, enter circulation, have a bunch of, again, pleiotropic effects and wide-ranging body systems, as we said. The question we'll answer now about the negative feedback loop is, how do I keep from making too much of these hormones? And here's the basics of how it works. Testosterone goes back up to the hypothalamus and blocks. The little flat is the standard format for blocker. Or we could say inhibits. So testosterone inhibits the hypothalamus from making GnRH. So if I'm not making any GnRH, am I going to make FSH or LH? No, right? So is my body going to make sperm? No. Is my body going to make its own testosterone? No. And so it's relevant to the answer to the case studies. This is why if you're injecting steroids, the testes shrivel up. Why? Because your body's not using them. You're not making any of your own testosterone, and you're not making any sperm. a worthwhile, one, it's on the test, okay? But easy to learn because it's on the short answer question of the test. I would simply enough take this drawing. You can write it all out with words. Yeah, sure. I won't erase it. That way you can get over here and get a good one. Alright. But this is how all of them work like this. Okay? The reason it's called hypothalamic pituitary target organ is because there's multiple target organs that have this exact same kind of feedback loop. Thyroid hormone production works just like this. It's not called FSH and LH, though, it's called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Same exact thing. Same exact story. Growth hormone works the same way, or very similar.
Whatever the end hormone is back up.
Yes, inhibits, exactly, right. Which essentially then is inhibiting its own production. So, of course, as it blocks, testosterone levels will fall. And then the blocker turns off, and then I get a pulse of this one, and that's how it works, in fact, it's pulsatile. And then
So when you're adding steroids, that
it shuts down this whole pathway.
it's already in there. It's already.
Yeah, since you're supplementing it, whatever, and the levels are they're so high. I mean, it's not even like when just for the record, I have not steroids, but I know what people do. It's crossed my mind before. The levels are so high when you supplement. It's not even physiological. Triple, quadruple the normal levels. So the system is completely suppressed. And I've heard and read stories, and I actually have heard from one person. You can do so many steroids over such a long period of time, just like the type 2 diabetes story I told you, and the leptin story I told you, and obesity. The receptors here are just like, okay, I'm done. And the system is broken forever. And I know people, one who's on, a man who's on hormone replacement therapy for the rest of his life because of steroids. I'm not saying don't do it. It's an observation about what can happen if you do. Knowledge is power. Okay. Good? Other thoughts about this? Exactly the same thing. Yep. But no one's like, oh, let me shoot myself a little bit.
No, not
yeah. The feedback circuit works the same exactly, right? FSH drives egg maturation. You're born with all the eggs you get, right? So it's not production, but egg maturation. And LH drives estrogen and progesterone, which have the secondary effects we mentioned, and feedback here and turn it off. And I'll walk you through how this works at the end. But essentially, this means that like when you're pregnant, estrogen and progesterone levels are really high, and so the system is shut down, which is a good thing because when you're pregnant, then you can't get pregnant, right? Because when you're pregnant, estrogen and progesterone are so high that no more eggs are maturing, which means you're not ovulating at that period, right? That's the observation. It wouldn't work, right? It couldn't be 2 months and 6 months and 8 months. Yeah, it wouldn't work. Literally, it would kill you, right? Okay, so here are the hormones. We're going to talk about a few of these. There it is for luteinizing if you're, for the spellings there. Yeah.
So are these some of the 5 that we can?
Absolutely, you can just use this one right here. Okay. This is an easy 5, right? Growth hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone, FSH, LH, and prolactin will cover it. Alright, so we'll walk through a couple of them. I can ramble on about all of them, but we won't. Briefly again, growth hormone is one of the most anabolic hormones you've got. It drives protein synthesis, it drives all cells to divide. This is another one you can inject this one and cause problems as well. You can see here, as I mentioned, it's regulated by now not 1 but 2. So RH is releasing hormone and IH is inhibiting hormone. So there's a little bit more regulation here with an actual direct inhibitor on top of the standard negative feedback that we mentioned here. So slightly more control, right? The more parts to the puzzle, the more regulation I can have, the more control I can have. Okay, what does it do? Again, protein synthesis all across the board. It also helps to drive fat burning. It's lipolytic. The word for fat burning is lipolysis or lipolytic. People like it for this reason. Okay. We mentioned already about the gonadotropins, FSH and LH, and I told you already what they do. I told you already about the releasing hormone, and we talked about the feedback circuit already. And prolactin, as the name suggests, is the one that drives lactation. And there's crossover here. Extremely high Extremely high growth hormone levels can drive prolactin production and men can lactate. Did you know? If you didn't know, now you do. Learn something new every day. Men can lactate for this reason. Again, there's another releasing and inhibiting hormone and so on. And here's a summary table, and your book would have a summary table similar to this as well. Okay, I want you to also know these ones. Oxytocin, I mentioned already about what it does. Are you holding some too? And I definitely want you to please learn number 2 there. Okay, so oxytocin is easy and for fun. Number 2, ADH, you definitely want to know this one. We're going to revisit this a bunch. So ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone. It's one of the most valuable hormones you have in that it allows you to do what? Not urinate. Well, you make urine. A different type of urine. Antidiuretic hormone. First of all, you should know, I think, what's a diuretic? Something that makes you pee all the time, right? So caffeine and alcohol are diuretics, and all those little weight loss pills that you can get like over the counter are full of caffeine and other diuretics. It's really good. You lost 5 pounds in a day of water. So antidiuretic hormone means you don't pee, right? So how is it that I can not pee? I'm going to keep the water and make what's called concentrated urine. What color is concentrated urine? Yellow. Yellow. This allows me to survive when I don't have adequate water available. Concentrated urine is dehydrated. We should try not to make a concentrated kind of urine. Talk about that in a minute as well. But yeah, the hormone allows me to, again, make concentrated urine or not. And as you can see there, then it consequently allows me to regulate water balance, which is extremely important, and we're going to get into how water balance is basically blood volume, and blood volume directly affects blood pressure and high blood pressure. And you can see there, insufficiency of ADH is a disease called diabetes insipidus. And there's a little bit more about oxytocin I mentioned already. A little more about ADH and how it works. And we're going to revisit the ADH story when we get to the kidneys and urinary system later. Super important. Yeah, when you drink alcohol, the reason you pee all the time is because you drank 5 beers. It's because alcohol inhibits ADH. This leads to dehydration, which leads to hangover and on and on. Okay. Cartoon for those 2 hormones. Next is thyroid gland. Thyroid. I definitely remember multiple choice questions about this. So the thyroid gland basically makes 3 hormones, two of which are basically called thyroid hormone. Okay, so it turns out thyroid hormone is actually 2 hormones. We're going to get that in a second. I'm for sure there's a multiple choice question about what calcitonin does. So write down calcitonin. You're going to know more than 5 hormones by the end of this. Okay. So calcitonin, what you want to think is, how do you remember? It tones down calcium levels. That's the way you remember that one. So calcitonin decreases calcium concentration in the blood. Just for fun, let me ask you. How? I'm going to come up with 3 of them. Yeah, okay. 3. How? There's 3 ways. 3 ways that I can alter calcium concentration in the blood in terms of it making it go down. What are they? If my blood is full of calcium, what's one way to get rid of some calcium? Mitrication, right? I can pee. Yes. So calcitonin binds to receptors in the kidneys that say, hey, we should excrete excess calcium. That's 1. What else can I do with calcium? What's calcium used for? Bone. So calcitonin also does what? Drives osteoblastic activity. Calcitonin increases the deposition of new bone by increasing osteoblast activity. And the 3rd one I wouldn't expect you to come up with, it binds to receptors of the GI tract and tells my gut to not absorb any more calcium. So it lowers calcium absorption from the food item. That's when calcium levels are high. want to go down. Now, we'll revisit the other hormone that goes with it in a second. Quickly about the thyroid hormones. Okay, so I can see a multiple choice question about, they contain iodine. They are called T3 and T4. The numbers 4 and 3 indicate how many iodine molecules they have. So T4 has 4 iodines, and T3 has 3 iodines. And you can read here, thyroxine is a secreted one. The major one that's secreted is called thyroxine. But it turns out that the more active of the two is the triiodothyronine one. So the triiodothyronine. I have to look at that every time. T3 is more active. It binds to the receptor better. So most target tissues have an enzyme that turns T4 into T3, and then it binds. That's how it works. And you can see what it does. It regulates what's called the BMR, or basal metabolic rate, which is important for heat production. You know, if I wanted to get really, really skinny, I could fill myself full of thyroxine. But oops, again, we have problems here because it's advised we see involved in blood pressure regulation, all tissue growth, all tissue development, nervous system, reproduction system. This is the most widely active, I mentioned, of all the hormones. Problems with thyroid hormone production in adolescence leads to all kinds of neurological and metabolic abnormalities and problems, and so on. Okay. Yeah. Right. So again, just for fun, if you were interested in reading through, you know, all the different things that thyroid hormone does, again, it affects every single body system. Like I said, all of them. Okay. And there's thyroid disorders, as you know, hyper and hypothyroidism. You can see there. Just for fun, you know about the goiter. What's wrong with his neck? Why is it all enlarged? That's where the thyroid gland is, first of all. So why is it all swollen? I don't know. Why is it all swollen like that? There's no iodine, right? But the hormone is made of what? Iodine and proteins. The way it works is the gland makes the protein part of the hormone, and then the iodine molecules are linked in at the end, and then it's secreted. So thyroid hormone levels are low because of an iodine deficiency. The thyroid stimulating hormone in my brain is like womp, 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 womp on fire, right? Telling my thyroid, hey man, we're low. Make more protein, make more protein, make more protein, make more protein. And so the thyroid gland is happy to comply. And it makes endless amounts of the precursor protein, but there's no iodine. So the gland is, this goiter is a swollen thyroid gland packed full of precursor thyroid hormone that just needs iodine to finish it and secrete it. And when you inject these kids with iodine, 24, 48 hours, goiter's gone. Okay. Parathyroid gland. The gland sits on top of the thyroid gland. It makes a hormone called PTH, or parathyroid hormone. This one is the opposite of calcitonin. Right? So here's what's going to happen. If you don't study, you're going to get these two mixed up, right? Calcitonin, doesn't calcium go up or calcium go down? How about it again? And then you're stuck guessing. You don't want to be guessing. Right? I told you the way to remember it. Calcitone it down. Tone down calcium. So PTH means, has to do the opposite. Parathyroid hormone increases calcium concentrations. And it works exactly the opposite of the other one. This is another one of those antagonistic pairs. So what does PTH do? What are the three things? Look at your list of what calcitonin does and tell me the opposites of that. So I can increase calcium absorption from the GI tract. What else? There you go. That was what I was looking for. I can also decrease excretion in the kidneys, and most importantly, what was said here, I can turn off osteoblasts and turn on osteoclasts. So parathyroid hormone does exactly that. It decreases osteoclastic activity and increases osteoclastic activity. It means you're going to eat your bone, which increases calcium. Which one? The last one? Yeah. So PTH decreases osteoblasts and increases osteoclasts. Decrease excretion in the kidneys and increase absorption in the GI tract. So calcium has its own receptors and the like. I hope you'll come to find that you really enjoy this class. And the reason, not because of me, but the reason is because we're coming full circle. All the stuff from AP1, we'll revisit some of these ideas about, osteoblasts and how they're regulated by different hormones, right? And as we move through the chapters, you're going to see that everything that you've hopefully learned, or you get a chance to revisit it, is all going to be there. Right? So the stuff you've learned is going to start to pay off as we move forward. There's lots of new stuff to learn too. But I hope you start to get that feeling. And at the end, you're like, I actually know something about my body and how it works. All of it, all the different systems. Forgive my, proselytizing, soapboxing moments about, I've got a few different things. No dairy, flush your teeth, something good. Exercise, good diet. But I'm not saying it because I think you should exercise just because I like exercising personally. I'm saying it because exercise is good for you. Increases muscle mass, increases bone density. Every time you do another study, like, oh wow, it increases my brain function. It increases learning. It stimulates neurogenesis. I mean, there's nothing wrong with taking a walk with your dog. Okay. I mentioned about that already. Adrenal glands are the next ones. They make these corticosteroids. You can see there again, they are cholesterol derivatives. Various different broad ranging responses, all of them focused on stress response. Okay? So if I'm trying to think about adrenal glands, I'm like, God, I don't want to memorize the super duper long list at the bottom. Think you can put a header on this list. The header is stress response. And then the list has context. So when you're sick, your body is stressed. When you're dehydrated, your body is stressed. When your boss is screaming and yelling at you, you're stressed. When you can't pay your bills, your car's broken down, these are all stresses, right? They drive the stimulation of these adrenal gland hormones. If there's a tiger chasing you through the jungle, you're stressed. That was the point of these hormones, was what's generally called fight or flight. So preparing your body. So I'm thinking about what should I do with glucose? Mobilize glucose storage, right? I need as much ATP production as possible, run away from the tiger, or whatever. Okay, I'm not interested in the anatomy of the gland. I need you to learn one of these mineral corticoids. And the one I need you to know is on the list there in bold, aldosterone. We're going to revisit aldosterone, that's why I'm asking you to learn it now. Check it out. What does aldosterone do? Yeah, I don't like these things. I should change this. Aldosterone acts in your kidneys to increase sodium retention. Let's be more specific. Okay, so it increases sodium retention. It makes you keep salt, makes you keep sodium. Aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption or retention. And where it works is in the kidneys. So it acts, we'll revisit this later, okay, but I want you to know there's probably a multiple choice question. Aldosterone acts in the kidneys to increase sodium reabsorption. Why does it matter? Tell me about why sodium is so important. Cardiac function. What else? It is the major extracellular ion. It's involved in skeletal muscle function, contraction. Do you remember action potentials from AP1? Action potential, when it's going up, what ion? Sodium moving out of the cell, right? So it regulates or is involved in nervous system function as well. Sodium concentration is extremely important. You should get the idea that it's extremely important because why? It gets its own hormone. You know you're special When God or evolution or aliens have given you a hormone that specifically coordinates the concentration of this one thing only, right? You have a gene stored in your DNA forever and ever to regulate the concentration of one thing called sodium. That means it's a big deal. Another reason it's a big deal is it's related to being a major extracellular ion, and you can write this down now, we're going to talk about this a bunch later too. Water follows salt. This is one of my truisms. It means it's true all the time, right? Water follows salt. What does that mean? It means that as I retain sodium, I'm also going to retain what? Water. Similarly, as I excrete sodium, I'm also going to excrete water. So this fancy regulation of sodium allows me to also regulate my blood volume. Yes. And we just said about blood volume is super important, not because I care about my blood volume directly. I care about my blood volume because it directly affects blood pressure. You can write that one down now too if you don't already know that. Blood volume is directly related to blood pressure. That means when blood volume goes up, blood pressure is doing what? Going up. So if I'm at home and I'm eating a bunch of processed food and I'm drinking a bunch of sodas and I put salt on everything, what's going to happen to my salt concentration? And then what's going to happen to my blood volume concentration? And then what's going to happen to my blood pressure? There you go. You get it? We'll talk more about how this works too, and it actually affects potassium concentrations and everything else. We'll revisit that. But you get the idea, right? The basics. Good. Another hormone, this is my least favorite hormone, cortisol. I hate cortisol. You can see there why. It's not so much when cortisol, like everything, when it's just going up and going down and it's in its normal little range, cortisol is fine. Okay. Problem is, excessive levels of cortisol is a problem. It inhibits protein synthesis. It inhibits bone synthesis. It blocks cartilage and ligament and connective tissue regeneration. In fact, it blocks basically all growth. Again, it's a stress response hormone. Preparing my body to do one thing only: get away from the freaking tiger. And once I've escaped the tiger, it's cool. I can go back to normal, and then I can concentrate on repairing my body and building new muscles. But I don't need new muscles if I'm dead, right? So it's like everything on hold right now to escape the tiger. That's what this hormone does. Cortisol is the #1 stress response hormone. Here's the problem.
Do women produce more cortisol than men?
I couldn't tell you, but my guess would be yes. Off the top of my head, I think yes. Now, there's no tigers. Right? I haven't seen a tiger outside of the zoo town. They're not running away from tigers. The problem is, my body doesn't understand work stress and to not make more cortisol, right? So when you're stressed out at work, or at school, or at home with bills, or whatever else it is, you're making cortisol. If you smoke, cortisol is up. If you drink, cortisol is up. If you're dehydrated, cortisol is up. If you're not getting enough sleep, cortisol is up. And I just told you, high cortisol bad. High cortisol blocks lipid burning. You can't lose weight like this. It also blocks protein synthesis. I can't get bigger like this. It blocks bone density increases. I can't increase my bone density if I'm super stressed. You see what I'm saying? It also drives water retention. So I'm going to be bloated. And so I can put on 5 pounds in a day. Right? You get the idea? Alright. Knowledge is power.
Does that one target a lot of cells in the body as well?
Exactly. Very pleiotropic effects. And that's a good thing in the short term, right? In the short term, I'm trying to escape the tiger. I'm cool with that. And if I'm dehydrated, it does what it's supposed to do. It helps me conserve water because I'm out. But the problem is, in general, modern life doesn't lend itself to normal physiological fluctuations. I get 4 hours of sleep every night of the week for 2, 3, 4 years. You know what I'm saying? I'm really stressed out for as long as I can remember. Okay. And I don't want to go through about how it works. Again, within normal ranges, cortisol is fine. It's excessive levels of cortisol we're talking about, which are extremely pathological, and you can read all about it if you want to. And here are some of the symptoms as we mentioned. Cushing's disease is high cortisol production, and it drives all the things that I just got done saying. Obesity, weird looking skin, muscle wasting, cardiac problems, osteoporosis, and so on. Okay. Once again, it's regulated by a similar negative neural feedback loop as we've already described. Pineal gland, very quickly, it makes a hormone you've probably heard of called melatonin that's involved in your sleep-wake pattern, your sleep-wake cycle. We're going quickly through it, but that doesn't mean that there's not one multiple choice question saying, what does the pineal gland do? Melatonin, sleep-wake cycle. Done. Pancreas, we talked about this one already as well. Insulin, glucagon. I can see multiple choice questions about these ones. Insulin does what? Yeah, both of them are regulating glucose levels, but specifically, insulin does what to glucose concentrations? It makes them go down. Again, how does this work? I explained it at the beginning, but let's do it again. We'll let the baby about crap. They had a baby shower today. I passed on cake and those little brownies you can buy at college, the icing on top. Oh god, those are freaking good. Have you ever had one of those brownie top icing top brownies? They're delicious. I feel my winner. I told them I didn't want it, and they gave me cake. No. You're bad. They're so delicious. So if I'm eating brownie and cake, I've made, personally, right, I've done it myself, driven my glucose levels up. So insulin is produced to make them go back down. Insulin decreases blood glucose levels. How? It tells the skeletal muscle system primarily, but also a little bit on the liver and a little bit on the adipose cells to suck up the glucose. I ate it. My blood glucose levels are up. Insulin is produced. It binds to my muscles, my liver, or my adipocytes, and then those cells suck the glucose out of circulation. The opposite hormone is called glucagon. How does it work? Now, think you're fasting. Think everybody fasts every single day of the week. When do you fast? When you sleep. Exactly. Everybody fasts when they sleep. So while you're asleep, glucose levels are going down. They reach a certain bottom end threshold. Glucagon is produced, and what's it going to do? Make my glucose levels go back up. Yes. Glucagon increases blood glucose when it's low. Think you're sleeping at night. Where am I going to get this glucose from? Do I store glucose? That's, I guess, where it is from. I do, actually. Where do I store it? 2 places. Okay, so I store glucose in my fat cells as fat. Adipocytes take glucose and convert them to fatty acids, as does my liver. But I actually store glucose. The storage form of glucose is called glycogen. My liver stores some, and my muscles store some. But I only store, we'll read this when we get to nutrition, I only store about 3 hours worth. Why can I only store so much glycogen? It's heavy. Glycogen is water soluble. So every molecule of glycogen I want to store, I've got to store 10 water molecules to hold it in solution. My liver can only, you see where this would go, right? Every other glycogen molecule in my liver could be the size of that big. No, it can't be, right? The reason I store lipids is because they're not water soluble, which is I can pack them in and so they're light. Lipids are awesome in that they are energy dense, more energy dense than glucose, and they don't weigh anything. To move them around is cost effective. And the reason why is because they're not water soluble. It's really quite amazing when you start thinking about it in this very good picture. How do you get this? I like to make those observations. How do you get this? I don't know, but it's pretty cool. Anyway, you got it, right? Okay. And the teeter-totter rule applies, and I mentioned to you about glycogen and insulin and all that. We've walked through that. I think we beat the diabetes thing to death enough tonight already, so I'll read this to you. But if you're interested in diabetes, there you go. Again, insulin deficiency is a problem. The gonads are the next major glands. We've discussed these hormones as well already, so again, I'm kind of happy to just kind of move forward. However, I would want you to know them as we address them already. The thymus is the next gland on the list. Just one thing to say about the thymus. It does make a bunch of hormones. It makes something like 3 or 4 different hormones, but they are not secreted. And so I'll just take a simple answer for what does the thymus do? It regulates T cell maturation. And we're going to revisit this later too when we get to immunity. You've heard of T cells, right? You've at least heard of helper T cells for sure. Why are they called T cells? For the thymus factor. They're called T cells because they mature in the thymus. So T is short for thymus lymphocytes, or thymus-derived lymphocytes. So the thymus regulates T cell maturation. And we'll talk about those cells when we get to the blood chapter. Oh, okay. So the heart makes a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide. We're going to talk about ANP later too, when we get to nutrition and fluid balance at the end. Look at ANP. This one decreases. This one does the opposite of aldosterone, among other things. Again, I told you, you see what's happening here, right? Reducing blood pressure by reducing blood volume. How? By excreting sodium. That's what the hormone really does. It drives sodium excretion, thereby eliminating water and decreasing blood volume and blood pressure. It's the opposite of aldosterone. If you don't know, just for fun, and you're practicing your vocabulary words, I highly recommend. This prefix, N-A-T-R-I, natria, means sodium. That's a prefix for sodium. It's not the only N-A-T word out there. Anytime you see N-A-T, something to do with sodium. And then the end of that word, uretic, sounds like what? Diuretic. Yeah. So where did they get natriuretic from? Sodium diuretic, natriuretic. That's how that. I mentioned already, and again, we're not going to go into all the different hormones here. We'll talk about them later when we get to nutrition, about the GI produced hormones. We talked about EPO already, I mentioned. We'll revisit the renin-angiotensin thing later too. Talked about vitamin D in the skin. I mentioned leptin for you already about appetite, energy, but don't worry about these other ones. And here's the summary table for this. Summary table. Not bad. Okay. Again, I mentioned to you about ADH. You definitely want to know about the ADH hormone. All right. Well, I don't know. That's it for this chapter. So the options are start with blood or go home. Probably a good idea. Stop your recorders, right? And then we can start a new recording for the blood chapter.